I was born on a Tuesday morning in the village of Ashanti, where the baobab trees stood like ancient guardians reaching toward the heavens, and the river sang songs our grandmothers taught us to hear if we listened with patient hearts. My mother said no drums sounded that night to announce my arrival. No lightning split the dark sky. No owls called warnings from the forest. The world simply continued its eternal dance, unconcerned with one more child entering it. When I released my first cry into the world, the midwife touched my mother's hand gently and said, "She is healthy and strong." Nothing more. Even then, from my very first breath, I was unremarkable. My parents named me Amma, hoping the name of one born on Saturday might bring fortune and blessings from the ancestors. Did not. I grew watching other children shine like newly polished brass catching sunlight, while I faded into the background like dust settling on clay walls, invisible and forgotten. Ashanti believed deeply in children touched by the ancestors, marked with gifts that set them apart. We had boys who could recite the names of 100 chiefs and their fathers after hearing them only once. We had girls whose voices carried across 3 valleys when they sang praise songs during harvest celebrations. We had children who could balance water pots taller than themselves on their heads before losing their milk teeth, walking with perfect grace. Everyone seemed marked by something special that made the elders nod with approval and smile knowingly. Everyone except me. I searched desperately for my gift the way others found theirs, waiting for it to reveal itself naturally like moonlight breaking through clouds. But nothing came no matter how long I waited. I was not strong like the wrestlers or quick like the runners who raced through the village paths. I was not wise with proverbs or skilled with my hands at weaving or pottery. I was simply there, a shadow others stepped over without seeing, without remembering. My teachers spoke of me with words that tasted of pity mixed with gentle disappointment. "Amma works with a willing heart and never complains," they told my parents during the gatherings under the great meeting tree where all important matters were discussed. "She shows proper respect to her elders and never brings trouble to anyone's door." But they never said the ancestors favored me with special gifts. They never said I carried promise of greatness in my spirit. When other parents danced with pride at their children's achievements, mine smiled with tight lips and spoke quickly of other things, changing the subject. I understood perfectly what their silence meant, even as a child. I was their disappointment wrapped carefully in patience and love, their ordinary daughter in a village that celebrated loudly those chosen and blessed by the spirits. At night, I pressed my face deep into my sleeping mat and whispered to the darkness that surrounded me, "If only I were blessed with something special. If only the ancestors remembered to mark me. If only I mattered to someone, anyone." The other children never mocked me with cruel words or deliberate meanness. That would have required them to actually see me, to acknowledge my existence. Instead, they looked straight through me when forming groups for games, forgot which compound belonged to my family even though they passed it daily, and created circles during celebrations that somehow never widened to make space for one more person. I learned to expect the space that always appeared beside me like a constant companion. During village celebrations and ceremonies, I would quietly help prepare the food or watch over the younger ones, accepting tasks that kept me useful but utterly invisible to those around me. I told myself repeatedly that the loneliness did not cut deep into my heart. I told myself I actually preferred the quiet, the solitude. But when the cooking fires dimmed to embers and the village slept peacefully under the stars, the ache in my chest felt heavy as river stones pressing down relentlessly on my spirit, crushing something inside me. When I had seen 13 rainy seasons pass, I gathered my courage and approached Mama Efua, the village healer whose knowledge was legendary. For years, I had watched her pound bark into powerful medicine, whisper sacred prayers to ancestors over those who suffered, and wrap injuries with hands that knew exactly what to do without hesitation. She studied me carefully with eyes that seemed to look past my skin and deep into my very spirit, searching for something. "Healing requires the gift of seeing what others cannot," she said finally, her voice soft as evening wind rustling through leaves. "You must know what troubles a person's spirit before they speak it aloud. I do not see that fire burning brightly in you, child. I am sorry." I bowed respectfully as I had been taught and thanked her with proper words, my face burning with shame I could not name or understand. Another path closed firmly before me. Another blessing I did not carry in my hands or heart. Another rejection to add to the growing collection. When I had seen 15 rainy seasons pass over our village, I sat with the griots who gathered beneath the old iroko tree each evening as the sun painted the sky. They wove magnificent stories that made people forget their troubles completely, tales that lived forever in memory like seeds planted deep in fertile soil. Could I learn the old stories and how to tell them? I asked Baba Kwame, the eldest and most respected of all the storytellers in 3 villages. He laughed warmly, not unkindly. You ask thoughtful questions, Amma, inquiries that show you think carefully before speaking. But they are safe questions, careful questions. A griot must ask questions that shake the world like thunder and make people think dangerous thoughts that challenge everything they believe. He touched my shoulder kindly, almost apologetically. Perhaps the ancestors called you to simpler, quieter work. I smiled politely and stepped back, swallowing disappointment that tasted as bitter as unripe plantain on my tongue. What work did the ancestors actually want from me? Nobody knew the answer to that question, not even me. I was adrift without purpose. When I had seen 17 rainy seasons, desperation pushed me toward the village warriors with their proud bearing and confident strength. Surely courage could be learned through dedicated practice and hard training, I told myself. Chief Kofi watched me attempt the basic movements and forms, the spear throws, the defensive poses, the warrior's dance. I tried with everything I had until my arms shook violently and sweat ran down my back like rain during the wet season. But I paused and hesitated when I should have struck decisively. I stepped back, I acted cautiously when I should have pressed forward boldly. You do not have the warrior's heart beating in your chest, he said kindly after the moon had changed twice. A warrior must move without thinking, must act on pure instinct. You think too much, question too much. I thanked him respectfully and walked home slowly as the sun set in brilliant colors, feeling smaller than a mouse crouching beneath an elephant's massive foot. If only I carried courage in my heart. If only I were anything but this invisible, forgettable nothing. That evening, as darkness fell over the village, I sat beneath the kola nut tree near our family compound and pushed my hands deep into the red earth. The soil felt honest and true, and it was solid in a way nobody else in my life was anymore. I had failed completely at every path I tried to walk. The healers did not want me among them. The griots did not want me learning their sacred stories. The warriors did not want me training beside them. What remained for someone like me? I thought seriously about walking deep into the forest at dawn and never returning, perhaps joining some distant village where nobody knew I carried no gifts from the ancestors. But even that desperate plan felt useless and pointless. I would still be me, still be unmarked and unblessed by the spirits, just somewhere else under different trees. The tears came quietly and steadily, like everything else about me. I wept until the stars appeared overhead, tiny witnesses watching my shame and loneliness from the vast sky above, silent and distant. What nobody in Ashanti understood or noticed was that I had been watching them carefully since I first learned to walk and observe. When you are invisible to everyone around you, you notice things that visible people never see or care about. I knew which elders would need extra firewood before the harmattan winds arrived to chill our bones. I knew exactly how the river swelled and rose after certain types of rain, and which paths turned to dangerous mud first. I knew when quarrels and disputes began, not with raised voices and anger, but with a heavy silence that came before anger erupted like a storm. I knew which children hid deep fear behind bright smiles, and which adults carried heavy sorrow behind their laughter during celebrations. I remembered everything because I had nothing else to fill my empty days and nights. I gathered observations carefully, like women gathered nuts from the forest floor, storing them away in my mind. This watching, this noticing, it was all I had. I moved through Ashanti like smoke drifting through thatch roofs, filling spaces nobody ever noticed or acknowledged. I would leave extra yam and plantain at the compounds of families too proud to ask for help, placing it carefully near their door before dawn broke. I would fix loose fence posts before goats discovered they could escape through them. When storms gathered ominously on the distant horizon, I helped elders tie down their roofs and secure their belongings before the violent wind arrived to tear things apart. Nobody ever asked me to do these things for them. Nobody ever thanked me either or even noticed what I did. They simply happened quietly, and I was the one making them happen in the shadows. I sometimes thought bitterly about how different things might be if they knew what I did for them. However, I did not fully comprehend what the ancestors were slowly and patiently shaping me to become. I only knew I could not stop caring deeply, even for people who never saw me, never valued me, and never remembered my name. The dry season, when I had seen 19 rainy seasons, arrived like a terrible curse from enraged spirits. The heat burned hotter than anyone could remember in my grandmother's long memory, so fierce and relentless that breathing hurt our chests. The river shrank to a thin, pitiful stream for the first time anyone living could remember seeing. The old people shook their heads gravely and spoke in worried whispers of bitter spirits and broken taboos. Then the sickness came to our village like a thief in the night. It started simply with Farmer Kofi coughing during the busy market day. By the next sunrise, 3 more people coughed with the same terrible sound. By the week's end, a dozen people burned with fever that no herbs could cool or calm. The healers prepared their strongest medicines with shaking hands, but nothing worked to stop it. The sickness spread anyway relentlessly, moving through Ashanti like army ants through dry grass, consuming everything. People grew terrified beyond anything I had seen. This illness was different, strange. This illness followed no pattern the wisest elders recognized from their years. Within 2 weeks that felt like months, the blessed people of Ashanti fell sick one after another. The strongest warriors collapsed first, their powerful bodies betraying them suddenly like broken shields that could no longer protect. Then the wise ones who remembered every proverb and every ancestor's name grew too fevered to speak even their own names clearly. The beautiful singers lost their golden voices to coughing that shook their entire chests violently. The gifted children who had balanced impossible loads on their heads now could not lift them from their sleeping mats without help. Fear replaced all pride in Ashanti, like darkness swallowing light. People who always had answers and wisdom suddenly had none at all. They called desperately to the ancestors loudly and constantly, their voices rising pleading to spirits that seemed deaf to their desperate cries. And through it all, while everyone panicked, I moved quietly among them, doing what I had always done faithfully, watching carefully, remembering everything. I tenderly cared for those who had never cared for me or seen me before. I carried heavy water pots to compounds where everyone was too weak to walk the long path to the river. I washed soiled cloths without complaint and spread them on bushes to dry under the merciless sun that beat down. I sat patiently with frightened children crying for parents who could no longer comfort them or even recognize them. I pounded herbs I had learned about from years of watching Mama Efua work. Even though she never officially taught me or acknowledged my presence, I noticed important things others missed. Some people improved slightly after drinking cool water from clay pots instead of warm water from gourds. Others grew worse when wrapped in too many heavy cloths despite the fever. The sickness had patterns running through it, small subtle ones nobody else saw because everyone was too frightened and panicked to think clearly or observe carefully. I began keeping detailed notes in my mind, tracking faithfully who recovered and who weakened, searching desperately for reasons nobody else thought to seek. There had to be answers somewhere. By the 3rd terrible week, Mama Efua herself collapsed weakly onto her sleeping mat, defeated. The Council of Elders fell completely apart as its members took to their beds one by one. Chief Kofi, who had always seemed unbreakable and eternal, like the Irako tree itself, now lay fevered and speaking to spirits only he could see in his delirium. Ashanti had built itself proudly around its blessed people, those touched by ancestors, but now those special people had disappeared, leaving them helpless. The village was a body without a head, stumbling blindly toward certain destruction. I stood alone in the village square one scorching morning, holding a basket of herbs nobody had requested or wanted. Around me everywhere, people wailed and argued and pointed fingers of blame at each other. What will we do now? Who will save us? Someone screamed desperately into the hot wind. Silence answered, heavy and terrible. Then, slowly, like dawn breaking, eyes turned toward me. The only person still standing upright. I'm still moving with purpose. I'm still trying when everyone else had stopped and surrendered to fear. Terror rushed through my entire body like floodwater breaking through a dam. They were looking directly at me now. For the first time in my entire life, they were actually seeing me clearly. For all my 19 years I had been completely invisible to them, and now that I was suddenly visible, all I wanted desperately was to disappear again into the background. I was not a healer blessed by ancestors with special gifts. I was not a leader chosen by the spirits for greatness. I was ordinary Amma who had failed miserably at every single path she tried to walk. My mouth went dry as sand in the harmattan. My hands trembled uncontrollably like leaves in strong wind. But then I saw a young mother holding her sick child close, hope and desperation fighting fiercely in her tired eyes. I saw an old man who had walked past me 1,000 times without greeting or acknowledgement, now looking at me like I might carry answers directly from the ancestors themselves. I took a deep breath that burned my chest painfully. "I can help you," I whispered. The words felt impossible coming from my mouth. But I spoke them anyway because someone had to. At first, they hesitated and doubted, looking at each other uncertainly. The palm wine seller's wife actually laughed sharply, though it sounded more like weeping than true laughter. Her. What can she possibly do for us? But fear makes people willing to try absolutely anything, even trusting the one they had always overlooked and dismissed. I started carefully with what I knew from years of watching. I separated the sick by their symptoms, noticing patterns the trained healers had somehow missed in their panic. Some had fever that peaked sharply when the rooster crowed at dawn. Others had fever that worsened when the sun touched the horizon at dusk. Some desperately needed cool cloths. Others needed warm wrapping despite burning skin. I organized families efficiently, assigning specific tasks, and keeping people calm when panic threatened. Fear feeds sickness and makes it stronger, I told them gently but firmly, remembering something Mama Efua once said. I brewed simple teas, not miracle cures, but small comforts for suffering bodies. And I listened intently. I listened to every complaint, every symptom, building understanding carefully in my mind like constructing a house brick by brick. Days blurred together like water running and mixing. I slept only in brief scattered moments, waking constantly to check on the suffering, adjust cloths, offer water to parched lips. My body ached painfully in every single bone. My eyes burned constantly from exhaustion that sat heavily on me like a grinding stone pressing down. But people were improving steadily. Slowly. Gradually. The recovery started with the children. I had moved to cooler compounds away from fires. Then I kept the elders calm and quiet, away from panic. Then others followed. Whispers spread through Ashanti like wine through palm fronds, rustling everywhere. She knew to separate them by symptoms. She remembered exactly who needed what. She sees what we all missed completely. The whispers were not quite praise yet, not quite respect. They were closer to confusion and amazement. How could ordinary Amma, who had failed at everything she tried, suddenly know what healers trained by ancestors did not? How was this possible? What had changed? Baba Kwame, the respected griot who had rejected me years before, recovered enough to sit upright on his mat. I brought him pepper soup to strengthen him, and he caught my wrist gently but firmly. His eyes were wet like morning dew on grass. "We called you ordinary for all these years," he said, his strong voice breaking like dry wood snapping. "We said you lacked the ancestors' touch and blessing. But we were looking for completely the wrong kind of blessing, the wrong kind of light. You were always burning bright with your fire. We were just too blind to see the light you carried inside you." His words broke something open deep inside me like a cracked calabash spilling its contents. All those long years of believing I was nothing special. All those painful nights of wishing desperately that the ancestors had marked me with visible gifts. And here was the truth I never once considered possible. Maybe I was not missing gifts after all. Maybe I had carried them faithfully all along. Maybe my gifts just looked different from others. Quieter, deeper, hidden like gold beneath river mud, waiting to be discovered. The illness faded slowly as the rains finally came, blessing our parched land. The last patient recovered on the first glorious day. The sky opened with a life-giving blessing. When everyone who could walk gathered in the village square, I stood among them, exhausted and overwhelmed by everything. The council, now recovered and strong again, offered me outstanding honors and recognition. They wanted to name me chief healer. Give me a respected seat among the elders. Build a shrine in my name for future generations. I looked carefully at their faces, faces that had overlooked me completely for 19 rainy seasons, and felt something strange washing over me. Not anger or resentment. Not bitterness or triumph. Just clarity sharp as a new blade cutting through confusion. If only you had believed sooner in what I carried, I said softly but clearly, you would have known the truth was always here inside me. I did not become something new or different. I just became visible to eyes that were finally ready to see what was always there. I declined their titles and honors respectfully but firmly. I did not need them anymore to know my worth. For the first time in my entire life, I knew exactly who I was and what the ancestors had been patiently preparing me to become. I was the girl who noticed what others ignored completely, who cared deeply when caring seemed pointless, who stayed steady and calm when everything else crumbled like old clay. Ashanti learned something profound that season, and so did I. The blessed are not always loud or obvious. They are not always visible from birth. At times, they move silently and patiently waiting for circumstances to unveil what was previously hidden. Those called ordinary often carry the rarest gifts from the ancestors, gifts more valuable than strength or beauty. They just need the right moment to shine. And I had finally found mine. The ancestors had marked me after all, in their own time and way. I was never ordinary. I was extraordinary in ways nobody thought to look for.